Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we're back with another Mock Draft Monday. And that, of course, means another lottery simulation. We are just 9 days away and 6 hours from the time I'm recording this portion of this mock draft video. Of course, there'll be quite a bit of a delay between the time I'm recording this and the time that I actually get to recording the mock itself, because I'll have to spend pretty much the rest of the day working through that. But let's go ahead here and see which team is going to be picking first overall. A couple things to watch for. The Dallas Mavericks at 10. If a team below them, so either Chicago, OKC, Toronto, or New Orleans were to jump, they would lose their pick to the New York Knicks. Also, very important for the Bulls to potentially move up, because if the Bulls do not move up, their pick goes to Orlando. Those are some of the key things to watch, as well as pick number 7, Indiana. Historically, the number 7 pick in the draft has moved up very frequently in Adam Silver's draft lottery. So we'll see if that holds true here as we simulate. And well, look at that. The Indiana Pacers do in fact move up, and everything I highlighted actually plays into fruition here as New Orleans jumps up into the top 4, therefore moving Dallas down to 11. They lose their selection. The Pelicans now sit at a very interesting spot in this year's draft. The Pistons keep the first overall pick. The Rockets stick at number 2, and therefore Spurs, Hornets, and Blazers all fall down a little bit. A lot of movement in this lottery simulation, as the team with only a 0.5% chance to move up to number 1 ultimately moves up to number 3. Very low likelihood. You see only a 2.4% chance here that they move up into the top 4, but that's what we see in this lottery, and it's a potential outcome on lottery night. So let's jump into that actual mock draft now. Just a quick reminder to also make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content like what you're seeing here, and then hit that notification bell. Just reminds you whenever I make a post on YouTube. Also, I want you to comment down in the comment section who you want to land the first overall pick. Last week we had a little bit of Manifestation Monday. This week we're just putting the victor in victory, and really depending on who wins the NBA draft lottery in real life, it's really going to shake up the NBA. It's going to be one of the most important nights in NBA history, honestly, when it comes to one single event kind of changing the future of the league and how everything's going to play out over the next decade. I think Victor Wembanyama is going to be right in the center of a lot of competitive playoff series, a lot of competitive pushes for potential NBA championships, and I think that whoever gets the first overall pick is going to be really, really blessed to have him on the franchise. So again, go down in the comment section, manifest that right now by saying Victor to the, and for me, I'm hoping for those Dallas Mavericks, but of course they were not lucky in this mock draft simulation. The team that was very lucky in the mock draft simulation was actually the worst team in the NBA, the Detroit Pistons. They only won 17 games this past season. So you might be saying, well, it's not really that they're lucky. They kind of earned it. But still, with the new lottery rules, they only had a 14% chance at landing the first overall pick. We'll see on draft night what happens. I am going to be recording a lottery prediction video on who I think is going to ultimately win the NBA draft lottery and how that's going to shake some things up in the NBA. But here in this mock draft, the Pistons, of course, are the team landing Victor Wembanyama, the most no-brainer first overall selection in quite a while, honestly. And you think about just a lot of the traits that he possesses, not only as a player with the physical tools at 7'4", he's got a decent frame to him. I know he is rather slight, but given his 7'4" frame, he does have a decent amount of weight on him. It's not like he's walking around at 180 pounds here. He's significantly heavier than that, and I think he's going to be somebody that, with the length that he possesses, is just going to overwhelm teams and give Detroit something that I think that they have a little bit of in Jalen Duren, but now you're going to maximize it with an even better shot blocker, an even better defensive weapon. I think Victor Wembanyama is going to be arguably one of the best weak side shot blockers in the NBA on day 1 of his NBA career. I also think offensively, Detroit, not only are they adding Victor Wembanyama in this draft, but you think about Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, those two guys have played 99% of their career without Cade Cunningham on the floor with them up to this point. So not only are you adding Victor Wembanyama, an absolute alien, an absolute game changer for this team, but you're also adding Cade Cunningham back into the fold. So you're not adding one, but two dynamic offensive players who play in completely different ways. This is going to give Detroit a real post-up option. I think Wembanyama is going to grow as a post-fade shooter. Now, I don't think he's going to be somebody who's going to consistently win by backing anybody down, but I do think he's got so much size that if you use him off of flex cuts, which is what I think a smart team would do, is generate ways for him to catch the ball at the block and maybe even closer to the rim. And he just turns and puts up a little right jump hook. I think there's a lot of ways to scheme Victor Wembanyama into close shots to the rim that are going to be super easy for him and very difficult for teams to contest. But he's also got the game to play out of isolation, which is very rare for a center at the top of the key. You think about the areas of the floor that Embiid typically dominates from and where Giannis Antetokounmpo plays from. When you think about kind of a point center, someone who works up the middle of the floor, kind of can go coast to coast with it and do some of those things as a pace setter. Wembanyama is going to do a lot of that at the NBA level, and I think the big steps for him to grow are kind of as a playmaker and just helping his teammates get better and better. But I'm telling you right now, this guy's going to make a lot of other people a lot of money in his NBA career because he's going to make his overall team just looks so much better. The Pistons are going to take a huge step forward with Wembanyama, and I know that there's been so much hype around him and the expectation he's going to come in and maybe be the best player in the league. He probably won't be that the first couple of years, but I can't stop buzzing about this guy. He's going to be the most special prospect I ever evaluate. I was only 3 years old when LeBron James was drafted, so I can't claim to have scouted him, but I'm telling you, they just don't come like this in the NBA draft. There's not 7'4" guys who can handle and move the way that he does. It's just a real rarity. And just honestly, Detroit, if you're a Pistons fan, you got to be smiling ear to ear right now with this mock draft. And whichever team on May 16th ultimately lands the first overall pick, it's going to be a massive game changer for that organization. I have a video plan kind of showcasing how much of a game changer it will become for that team. I have pretty good insight to what that's going to end up looking like, and we'll see what team actually lands him. So then going into second overall, we now look at the Houston Rockets here, which is an interesting team as well in this spot. And Houston's a team that with the second best odds, you feel like, okay, they're in a spot where they could add some seriously good young talent to an already seriously good young core with a now very good coach who I think has proven a lot in the 1 year he was a head coach in this league. And he also had a very good track record as an assistant coach in Ime Udoka. And now the Rockets have the opportunity to get exactly what they need on their roster, which is a point guard and an organizer. I've been talking for multiple months now at this point about James Harden potentially landing in Houston this offseason. And while that does make a lot of sense to me, especially if they move outside of pick number 2, say they're picking first and get Wemby, or they're picking 3 and get like Brandon Miller, that makes a lot of sense. But if you have Scoot Henderson here, like, I love James Harden. James Harden's one of my favorite players ever. I know Rockets fans still love James Harden for everything he brought to Houston and how well he represented H-Town. But this is a much younger player, a guy who I think his ceiling is extremely immense. The player I compare him to most frequently is Anthony Edwards based on his kind of physical traits. Now, I know he's a little bit shorter, more of a true point guard than Anthony Edwards, but really at the heart of their games, both of them are downhill creators who can get to the rim and score, very athletic vertically, can jump off of 1 or 2 feet, specifically 1 in most instances for both Scoot Henderson and Anthony Edwards. Both of them like to get to the mid-range, especially those elbows. I think that for both Scoot and Ant, both of them like to get to the right elbow more than the left elbow, but they're good going both ways. And then I think the big swing skill is how well they shoot from behind the arc. And I think Scoot Henderson, if he shoots the 3-ball really well, he becomes an absolute superstar. If he never learns how to shoot the 3-ball higher than 32%, he's still a really, really great player. And that's why he, for me, has never wavered from being the second overall pick in these mock drafts. I know that there's always been this buzz around Brandon Miller and, oh, he's having such a good freshman season at I don't care. I don't care. Scoot Henderson, we can't act like what he did against Victor Wembanyama in that exhibition game between Mets 92 and G League Ignite didn't happen. I know that his season was a little up and down, didn't necessarily flash the way that a lot of people were hoping for him to. He also had to deal with some injuries and, concussion protocol, that kind of stuff. He's still worth the number 2 overall pick, and I don't think a team should overthink it. I think that they just need to stick there, trust their initial gut, trust their initial reaction, and select Scoot Henderson second overall. To me, it's very, very clear that that should be the selection on draft night, but we're never really sure. There's some instances where like a team could be picking there, like say Detroit, and do they want to go with another guard or do they take a wing? That's maybe where we have a little bit of a discussion. But even then, for me, the talent should always trump when it comes to a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. There's a reason you're picking top 5 most oftentimes. Now, there's a team here that doesn't really warrant a top 5 selection, but they landed here at number 3, and that's the New Orleans Pelicans, which is a crazy turn of events in this mock draft. So if you're a Pelicans fan, you probably are smiling ear to ear, just like those Pistons fans we talked about earlier. And New Orleans in a spot here to add some really, really good young talent. And I kind of had a tough decision to make here, actually, with the Pelicans. I think for the most part, a lot of people trust Brandon Miller to be the 3rd overall pick at this point, but Thompson, I think during the combine, he's going to be one of the big guys to watch. I think during individual workouts, the actual physical standpoints are really going to stand out with him in terms of his athletic traits, his ability to attack the rim downhill. He's going to be able to showcase some of his handle in one-on-0 workouts. And I think he might be more impressive than Brandon Miller in some of those instances. And New Orleans kind of needs more of a point guard than they do a wing. You think about the wings that they have on their roster: Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, who kind of plays like a point guard, but, you know, he's kind of got that wing body to him a little bit. Herb Jones, you, of course, have Trey Murphy, Najee Marshall. This team's kind of loaded on wings, so I thought, do I look at Thompson? Do I take Thompson here? But I ultimately landed with Brandon Miller still being the selection, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, trade flexibility right now is key for New Orleans. If they landed this pick, I think that they would explore trading it for a superstar level player, some high-end guy. If a team feels like, hey, Brandon Miller could be our player, our guy of the future, I think that there's some teams that would be interested in moving a star or a higher-end all-star level player to potentially New Orleans for this pick, or whichever other team could potentially move up to the spot if they're looking to move it. New Orleans could then look to add to their roster and kind of change the dynamic and maybe get one more guy in if they used Valanciunas' contract, plus a little bit more, maybe Dyson Daniels in there to get something done. But realistically, they could also pivot the other way, where maybe Brandon Ingram could be moved for an even bigger player than we're expecting. Maybe like a true superstar, like a top 5, top 7 guy, maybe a Kawhi Leonard even. We could see something like that where we see an Ingram for Kawhi swap with maybe a pick involved. And then the reason why I would go Brandon Miller here is Miller would be like the Ingram replacement long term, which does make some sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that they should trade Brandon Ingram. This is purely a mock on what I think could be in play for these teams. So New Orleans here, for me, they pick Brandon Miller, one, because they believe in the talent. Secondly, they feel like, hey, we've loved to have all of these wings, and they kind of have a good monopoly on them at this point. Honestly, you could see a lineup at some point with Ingram, Zion, Brandon Miller, Herb Jones, and Najee Marshall on the floor, or Trey Murphy in there. You could, substitute them across. They basically have 6 great wings that they would love to play at all times. And that's a luxury that literally 0 other teams in the NBA have. And they'd be able to play with a lot of length, size, but still have the shot making to back it up, with Miller and Ingram specifically kind of fitting perfectly around Zion Williamson when they're all on the court. So, Brandon Miller still makes a lot of sense here if they were to keep the pick, which is why I ultimately landed on him. They would just really have a strong monopoly on one of the most valued and premium positions in the NBA, which is skilled size on the wings. Number 4, we move in here to the Indiana Pacers. And Indiana, this feels like a really difficult spot for me. This feels like a spot where they'd be willing to trade out of this pick a little bit, maybe move down to, say, 5, 6, or 7 if a team wanted to jump up for a specific player, and then that way Indiana could recoup future assets while also still adding a good player in this year's draft. But I didn't mock them a trade here in this mock draft video. I just felt like with a lottery simulation, it's kind of difficult to mock like a real trade and say, oh, well, this is going to happen because we don't actually have the real order yet. So I didn't want to do anything definitive with this pick, but I just wanted to highlight that as a potential option if this were to happen, where both Scoot and also Brandon Miller are off the board at pick 4. This kind of becomes a tricky spot, because do the Pacers look at Thompson? That's ultimately what I had them go with here. Simply based off the talent, I think he would be an athletic component that really Rick Carlisle's never had on one of his rosters. You look back to his time with the Dallas Mavericks, his days in Indiana now since coming back to the Pacers. I think that Thompson's like such a freaky, quick twitch athlete. Like, not necessarily like the traditional form of he jumps completely out of the gym, 48-inch vertical, anything like that. But his side-to-side fluidity and mobility is unmatched in this draft, in my opinion. His ability with the basketball in his hands to change direction and really put pressure on the rim and on a defense to try and stay in front of him, again, I think is nearly unmatched, if not unmatched in this draft. I think that, you know, Scoot Henderson has some of those elements, but I think that Amen Thompson, when he's a little bit more decisive downhill, probably has an easier time getting to where he wants to go, just based off of the skills and the traits that he has. The big swing skill for him is shot making, which is why you wonder, is this a fit with Indiana next to Mathurin and Halliburton? You know, Mathurin very much a downhill slasher already, someone who looks to go finish plays, and Halliburton, one of the best drive and kick guys in the league. Do you want to surround Halliburton with an Amen Thompson, which is why I think a trade does make some sense here. But if you are picking off the upside and you're saying, okay, Indiana, this is your chance in the top 4 here to add a premium high-end player, I think Amen Thompson could really grow into that. I think there's going to be a lot of buzz about him potentially passing Brandon Miller in a lot of eyes of executives, just based on the physical tools that I've highlighted multiple times already. But he does have a pretty well-rounded skill set already outside of the shooting. He's got an electric handle. He's a fantastic passer. He's a very good lob passer, which I think is an underrated trait to come into the NBA with, because there's going to be more passing windows that are open for him to throw than other guys. I think he has this size and the skill set at 6'7" to be a cutter in the NBA as well, which is something he hasn't done a ton of yet in his career. So it would take a little bit of time to learn and play that way. But I do think that, you know, kind of a fit of Mathurin and Amen Thompson on the floor, maybe at alternating times, is a very intriguing thing around Halliburton, kind of giving you a little bit more backside rim pressure, someone who's going to be willing to cut off the ball. Again, it's going to take some time for Amen to get there, but I do think it's an intriguing grab nonetheless for Indiana if they were to keep this pick. But again, like I said, I think a trade would be very possible as well for a team that would like to move up for Amen Thompson. Pick number 5 now, as we move on here, we have the San Antonio Spurs, a team that I think would really, really be benefited by a top 2 pick in this year's draft. I think that they really, really need it, but they're not in the spot right now in this mock draft to get it. So what are we going to do? We're going to do what the Spurs do, and they're just going to draft a very good player. We're going with Houston's Jarace Walker at 6'8", 240 pounds. He's got all the physical tool set that you're looking for a top 5 pick. You think about some of the guys in the past, a Patrick Williams, a DeAndre Hunter. The 4-man position typically gets drafted very high because you're looking at guys who, again, like I highlighted with Brandon Miller and what New Orleans would be building with him in terms of this like amount of length and size and skill set. You're adding, again, another bigger player who has the premium position attached to him as a wing, a big wing who can defend across multiple positions, but also has an emerging skill set offensively. I think Jarace Walker, out of the remaining players in the draft, probably has the best score skill set available at this spot, just simply because he's able to put the ball on the deck at his size, get to spots on the court. He's able to shoot fadeaway shots, both at the mid-range level and a little bit closer to the rim, kind of outside the paint just a hair. I think he's got a very nice post turnaround, which is probably further developed than even Victor Wembanyama's in this draft at this point. Victor, of course, you're taking him based on the long-term upside, some of the stuff that he's shown already. I think he's going to be great day one as well, but I think he could turn into arguably the best player in the league at some point. Jarace Walker is not going to turn into that, but I think he's going to come in with a very high floor and still a relatively decently high ceiling, which is why San Antonio takes him here. I know there's going to be questions from Spurs fans. Well, we just took Sohan last year. We don't really need another forward. This is just like with New Orleans. You want to have as many high-value players as you can at one time. The NBA is very much an asset league. The more good players you have that are valued as high-asset players, the better. It opens up a ton of trade flexibility for you. The NBA is not about positional fit, at least not anymore. It's not. You can't just say, oh, we have our power forward in Sohan. I don't care. Play Sohan at center then, and play Jarace Walker at the 4. I don't care. Play your 5 best players, put them on the court together, allow them to build up trade value, and then at some point, maybe San Antonio says, oh, we're missing this little element. It's not about making sure you have a point guard, a shooting guard, a small forward, a power forward, and a center on the court at all the same times. It's about having guys who can shot create, put the ball on the deck, get to certain spots on the floor, score. It's about guys who can put the ball on the deck to create for others, like what Tre Jones does. There's a lot of different tools and ways to win games, and it's not about making sure you have each of the 5 positions checked off with 2 guys at each spot. It's not the way that it works anymore. Really never should have worked that way, but that's how it was. Positions are created to help people just kind of generally understand the game and some of the roles and responsibilities of each spot. But those are always changing in the league, especially when you have good coaching, which, I mean, I don't need to talk about Greg Popovich's legacy as a coach. just hope that this team starts winning a little bit here. And I think Jarace Walker could go a long way in helping them do so. Number 6, we have the Charlotte Hornets here at this spot. And with the Hornets falling down in this mock a little bit, there is some challenges for this team to continue building and implementing to their roster. I think there's a big question around Miles Bridges. What is he going to look like after a year off in the NBA? How is he going to come back to Charlotte, which is where I presume he will play next season? But let's get fun with it. Let's add another highly athletic freak athlete type player to them in Cam Whitmore, a guy who I think some people are out on, but I think when you really turn on the tape of this guy, his quick twitch explosion out of the triple threat is very, very unique and dynamic. He doesn't need a lot of dribbles to get to his spot. I think he's different from Amen Thompson in that regard. You know, I'm saying some of the same verbiage, but Amen Thompson does it more with a live handle. I think Cam Whitmore here can probably just blow by you off of his first step and just get to a spot where, oh yeah, by the way, I'm like 235 pounds and I'm way too strong for you to even ride my hip, and now I'm going to explode off of 2 feet and dunk on your center. He's got that type of physical tools to him, and he's also emerging as a skilled player at this point. Again, you're not a good triple threat player by accident. I think he's put in so many reps. He had a great summer last year playing for USA FIBA U19, I believe, and I just think that there's a lot to like about Cam Whitmore as an individual. His shot making's coming along. I think he's flashed enough at Villanova when it comes to, hey, he hits a step back 3 here. He's able to get to a certain spot and rise up and find success here. But really, you're drafting him based off of his slashing upside. And I do think Charlotte would become must-watch TV with both Bridges and Whitmore on the floor playing off of LaMelo Ball. Of course, Bridges found so much success with LaMelo that it makes me very confident that Cam Whitmore would fit very well here for Charlotte as well. I do think the Hornets have significantly more needs than just one more wing on their roster, but I think Mark Williams, if he takes another step forward into year 2, I think by the end of the first year of his career, we saw some of that progression and some of what we were hoping to see from him coming in out of Duke. And now I think that you can confidently say that they have their long-term center, at least at this point. That's what I would bet on. So then you have Bridges, you have Whitmore. Now I just think it's about trying to complement this team with a lot of shooting and more defensive-minded guys who are physical players who can guard guards. I think that's one of the big issues with this team. They need one more guy who can guard a guard. Terry Rozier does that, of course, but we'll see what happens with him if they look to trade him this offseason. I wouldn't be completely surprised by that, but at the same time, I haven't heard any definitive news on that either, so I'm not going to speculate on that too much. I just think Charlotte here, very decent player to end up with, especially if you move down in the lottery. It usually feels so bad, but I think this highlights the strength of this class, where at 6, you're getting a Cam Whitmore, who in most drafts probably goes 3rd or 4th overall, honestly, just looking at kind of the history of the picks. Maybe not last year with Jabari Smith, but I mean, there's just a lot of really good players that in this draft are going to fall to the top 5 that in most drafts don't. So I think that Cam Whitmore is going to be a home run here for Charlotte at this spot. Pick 7, we now look at the Portland Trailblazers, who I think are a really interesting team to keep our eyes on this offseason for a few different reasons. Potentially trading Damian Lillard. They have 2 first-round picks after that Josh Hart trade. Could they look to trade either of them? Both of them. We'll see what happens with Portland. But I think the Blazers are a very unique and interesting team for us. They have an interesting future. They could make a really good decision and build their future out very, very well. They could also make a bad decision and completely tarnish the future of this franchise, which is why I think that they're so dynamic at this spot with where their franchise currently sits around Damian Lillard. And I think Joe Cronin's got some decisions to make for this organization, but the first decision here is going to be spearheaded by Mike Schmitz, who I think is going to fall in love with this player, Taylor Hendricks out of UCF. Now, comparatively to Jarace Walker and Cam Whitmore, the reason why he goes below both of those two in this mock draft, just with the way things shook out, I think that some teams are going to be looking for more offensive upside, and I think both Whitmore and Walker possess that over Hendricks. But I think defensively, very likely Hendricks is the best of the 3. On that end of the floor, he's going to be the best rim protector from those 3 guys, which is one of the most important elements to team defense. Like, if you're checking off things that you need on a team, I think that rim protection should be near the top. Honestly, just about as important as shot creation, in my opinion, just because it gives you ways to defend that other teams don't have rim protection. If you don't have rim protection, your perimeter defense just has to be so much better 1 through 5. You have to be so much more mobile and switchable. And when you have a guy back there, we saw it with Rudy Gobert in Utah for so long, that Rudy Gobert really just covered a multitude of sins for that organization. With the way that their teams were built, they just didn't have guys who could stay in front of people very frequently. And I think Taylor Hendricks, not that he's going to be Rudy Gobert level or anything like that, but he's going to help in that regard. And right now, Portland just doesn't have a lot of guys who protect the rim very well. Eubanks gives them a little bit of that, but he gets in foul trouble pretty frequently by doing so. Yusuf Nurkic doesn't challenge anybody above the rim, in my opinion, at this point. Of course, Jeremy Grant does give them some of that. But I think Portland right now, to me, I would prefer them looking at this long term and not rushing into something for Dame. So I probably would be in the camp that I would consider trading Damian Lillard if he wants to try and go win. Like, I'm not just trading him to trade him, but if his idea is, hey, I want to go somewhere else and actually try and compete for a championship, and if you're not going to trade these picks to do that, then I would at least open some of those discussions with other teams, because I don't think the best case scenario for Portland includes trading this pick and trying to go get some all-star level player to pair with Damian Lillard and Jeremy Grant, because I just don't think that's enough to win in the West. I mean, look at some of the flaws already with the Phoenix Suns. Even with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton and Chris Paul, we still aren't sure if that team's going to be good enough to go deep in the playoffs. And I think if you're Portland, how could you be confident with Jeremy Grant as your third best player if they went out and traded for a star? I don't really see it. I think that there'd be some real concerns here for me with Portland long term, which is why I would prefer to stick with the young guys. Take take Taylor Hendricks here, a guy that I really like, and build this thing out right long term, maybe around Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe, who are two good young building blocks. Pick 8, we move into the Orlando Magic now, who have 2 picks in this first round. Of course, the other one coming from the Chicago Bulls. But with this first spot here, pick number 8, I've landed on it again for the second week in a row. Ausar Thompson from Overtime Elite, twin brother of Amen Thompson, who we highlighted at 4th overall. Now, Ausar, I think, a little bit lower of a ceiling because he does a little bit less with the ball in his hands. But I don't think that that's necessarily condemning of his NBA career, because I do think that there is some potential for him to grow with the ball in his hands and really kind of, I think Orlando might be one of the best spots for him to do so. I think Jamal Mosley's done a very good job, and the developmental staff for Orlando, out working with wings and really progressing their game with the ball in their hands. I think we've seen, of course, Franz Wagner's taking some meaningful steps forward early in his career. I think Paolo Banchero came into the league with a pretty pro-ready skill set, but I think Orlando's done a decent job amplifying that as well. And I think Ausar Thompson kind of possesses some of those same traits as like a downhill athlete. Now, I think he's more athletic than both Franz and Paolo, which is a big plus here for Orlando. Getting a little bit more quickness and vertical explosion around their 2 build-around wings is already something I'd be intrigued with. I think one of the key words of this draft in general so far has been wings. We look at the players that are coming in, some of these top 10 picks, and it's all about size, length, versatility, and athleticism, and a lot of these guys possess it. And these teams that are adding these guys, they're going to have different abilities, different ways to play than some of these other teams out there. And I think Ausar Thompson is a very good lob finisher, a very good transition player at this point. I think his half-court offense has been a little spotty. I know people have been pointing to an uptick in shot making. With the amount of games Overtime Elite played, it's very difficult to actually point to that as like signaling improvement, and not just, oh, they had a 16 to whatever game season. Can you really bank on that and say, oh, this guy got so much better? Or is it just, okay, well, he had 2 good games in a row in a short season? Think about the difference between a 2-game sample in Overtime Elite is like a 10-game sample in the NBA. And I don't even think we hold 10-game samples as like gospel in the NBA. So I'm not going to bet on smaller sample sizes here for Ausar, but I do think that Ausar could be a pretty nice player who does grow into something pretty intriguing down the road. Moving on here to pick 9, now we look at the Washington Wizards. And for this team, I don't think the mock could have fallen any better for them. With Orlando, I really did consider this player as well, but Ausar just made more sense to me based on what they have been looking at. They've been liking to add wings. And again, I think wings are very valuable in this league. But they get a guy who is basically wing size here for Washington, but has more of a point guard skill set in Anthony Black, one of my favorite players in this year's draft, because I think he's got a really significantly high floor. I almost see no way that Anthony Black isn't just like a good NBA player. Now, do I see a way or a pathway that he's like an 8-time All-Star? Probably not. I just don't think that that's really in the cards either. But Washington doesn't need that, especially if they do decide to commit to Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis. I think that they just need to fill out this roster with good, strong contributors who fit. And I think Anthony Black is probably one of the best fit examples in this mock draft up to this point, because he's going to be able to slow the game down, take care of it when he has to. He's also somebody who just is a very intuitive passer and makes the right read, controls the game, and that's very rare for a young guy coming into the NBA. I have a lot of confidence in Anthony Black. You know, year one might be a little up and down. It just typically is for rookies. But by year 2 or 3 in the league, I just feel like, yeah, Anthony Black's going to understand what the game plan is. He's going to understand what the team wants to do and how to do it. And he's going to provide that stability to the point guard position for Washington next to Bradley Beal, and he's a huge plus defensively, which is why I think this is such a good fit for Washington. They already have nice defensive players. I think Kristaps Porzingis is extremely underrated defensively. Deni Avdija, one of the lesser talked about players in the league that deserves some real love and recognition, because defensively he's been fantastic the last 2 years under Wes Unseld Jr. And I think now you add another kind of rangy defensive beast who at 6'7" and with extremely long arms can interrupt the game and passing lanes, can interrupt it as a kind of pseudo help defender on drives, but also just in general can be a good on-ball point of attack defender, which I think Washington needs one more of at least. And I think just the culmination of length and size, Deni Avdija plus Anthony Black plus Kristaps Porzingis is a really strong defensive trio. And let's say that they find a way out of Beal's contract. I mean, then you have ways to build it. But even if you don't, Beal's kind of the offensive player for you that you'd like to surround some of these guys with. Obviously, in my opinion, Kristaps Porzingis is right there when it comes to best player on the Wizards discussion. I think he is more sound defensively and gives you similar offensive production to what Bradley Beal is. And as long as Porzingis can stay on the court, even more so than Beal lately, I think that there's a good argument to be had that Washington is significantly better with Anthony Black, especially if they keep both Kuzma and Porzingis past this season. Pick number 10, we have the Utah Jazz sliding in here, and Danny Ainge probably really happy with this spot. At 9, in some of my mocks, without them moving down, kind of felt a little early to pull the trigger on this, but at 10, all bets are off, and Utah sitting here, and Danny Ainge says, let me run this up to the podium. This is a Danny Ainge special, and that is Cason Wallace out of Kentucky. Just feels like a Danny Ainge selection. He's a gritty player who defensively just really is reminiscent of Marcus Smart, where he doesn't really care about his size, if there's a mismatch there or not. Just seems like he always comes up making a big play when he has to. I remember earlier in the year watching games where he had 8 steals, and the next game he followed that up with, I think, 6 steals. Just, I think stocks are one of those things that's very interesting to look at for college players, because typically if a guy is bringing in record number of stocks when it comes to steals and blocks, usually means that either the guy is so much more physically gifted than the players that he's facing, because one, he's just outmanning them and getting to spots and just ripping the ball away from them at points, or just like ascending above them to block the shot or whatever. But there's also the element to it of this guy's smarter than everybody, because he knows what they're trying to do. He makes a lot of help side rotations to either block the shot or steal the ball, and I think we saw that a lot from Cason Wallace. I don't think he's physically super imposing over guys, but I think he just has the brains to be a great defender in the NBA, and because of that, I would buy stock on him. I think back to a guy like Davion Mitchell when he came out of Baylor. We saw Davion Mitchell, I think, have a very good postseason as well, guarding Steph Curry, and then surprisingly getting only 8 minutes in the final game of that series, and then Curry goes off for 50 points. I don't think that there's a indirect correlation there. I think that those two things are tied together a little bit. And I think Cason Wallace doesn't do the things Davion Mitchell does as a point of attack defender on ball. I don't think he's going to be able to pick up 94 feet in the same way, but I think that he's going to have similar levels of defensive impact, but more so off the ball as kind of a lane crasher, somebody who's going to understand that, oh, I have to tag the roll guy here, and he's just going to slide in there and do it. I think someone who does a very good job of this right now in the NBA that is very underrated for it is Austin Rivers for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think a very smart player because of obviously his way he grew up, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Like, he grew up with an NBA coach as his father. So I think Cason Wallace just extremely cerebral defensively, good instincts, and he's got the skill set to play on that end of the floor, as well as taking steps forward offensively. I think for him, top 10 feels right to me. I know I mocked him around 12, 13 a little bit more frequently as well. It really depends. If teams fall in love with a certain guy, I could see him sliding just a little bit. But at the end of the day, whoever gets Cason Wallace is, in my opinion, getting a very good player. Pick 11, the New York Knicks. Welcome back to the lottery here, especially in this mock draft where after they traded the pick for Josh Hart and the Mavericks season kind of collapsed, we haven't talked about the New York Knicks very much in some of these mocks, and I do think this is a real trade spot for a few different reasons. First of all, everyone's going to immediately assume, oh, star player, which I think would be in play here. If the Knicks could offer pick 11 and all of their other assets to go get a star, I think that, one, the Knicks would have a lot of interest in doing so, but I think other teams around the league would be interested in making some type of swap around the New York Knicks assets as well. They have a lot of good assets, a lot of good young players like an Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickly that they could attach into some of this. RJ Barrett, of course, you could also throw in there into that discussion. So the Knicks are loaded with assets. The other trade that I could see them making is one where they do what they did last year, where they trade out of this pick. They want to open up some type of money or financial maneuver for them by trading this pick and maybe Evan Fournier to another team that has cap space or something like that to kind of reshuffle their cards a little bit, open up a trade exception. There's some arguments to be had for New York making some moves in some of these regards, but there's also just the pathway of them sticking here and drafting, which would be Nick Smith Jr. For me, an offensive creator who has really good touch. And before the year, I think a lot of people were assuming he'd be a top 5, top 6 pick in this year's draft pretty comfortably. I think for the most part, we started the process with him kind of maybe being the 3rd pick behind Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson. And it's just not the case anymore. Of course, some questions about his knee. That was really what hindered him to begin the year. We didn't really get to see him very much. And then when he did play, he was a little inconsistent up and down. But he had moments this year where he looked like, wow, this guy could be a really, really good pick. Before the year, I think everyone expected him to go before his teammate Anthony Black. Now at this spot, it seems like for me, I've almost settled on Anthony Black going before Nick Smith Jr. Now I wouldn't be shocked if the inverse is true and some team just falls in love with Smith Jr. But at the same time, I just significantly don't feel that way myself. I feel like Black is just so much safer, especially with my current intake on the medicals. I don't have all the medical information that I would arguably need, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. With what the history looks like to me on the outside. So the Knicks here, I think Smith Jr. would be a fit, but otherwise I could see a team really having interest to move up to this spot to get a guy who was formerly looked at as a likely top 5 pick in this year's draft. All right, moving into pick number 12 here now, we look at a team here in the Orlando Magic. This pick comes from the Chicago Bulls, so they have the option here to kind of complement that Ausar Thompson selection we went with earlier, which is why I felt pretty confident making that pick, because with the other skill set that they really need, there's some really strong options left on the board, but my preferred option for them at this spot would be Gradey, and I think this would be their own preferred option. I know a lot of people have looked at Jordan Hawkins, maybe over Gradey, and I understand, really good March Madness run. He's got some of that momentum moving into this draft process, but Gradey is significantly bigger at 6'8" compared to Jordan Hawkins around 6'5". He's a little bit lengthier. He's I think just about as good of a shooter, if not arguably a better shooter. I think he's a better inside the arc scorer. He's a better offensive rebounder. He's I think going to be a similar defender because of his length. I think that mitigates some of his athletic limitations in comparison to Hawkins. And for me, Orlando, they have the ability here to, we've already highlighted Ausar Thompson and Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, wings with guard type skill sets. Now you add another wing here with perimeter shot making that can really fit around that. That's kind of the no-brainer. You add an elite sharpshooter who can space the floor for you, but also is not a huge liability with the ball in his hands, which is a reason why some sharpshooters get drafted in the lottery, because they can do extra stuff other than just shoot the basketball. And I think Gradey fits into that category. And then you look at their big men spot too. Wendell Carter Jr. definitely probably holding it down at this spot currently. Could we see a lineup at some point of a bunch of 6'7", 6'8" guys and bigger? Probably. And again, the NBA right now, premium position, wing, length, skill set, those are all the things that go into that. Small ball is really not a thing. It's more of a gimmick than anything. And the only reason you go with small ball ever is because you don't have skilled big men. You think about Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks, you think about Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers, you think about the Denver Nuggets and Nikola Jokic. Why would those teams never play small ball? It's because their big men are so skilled and so good that you don't want to take them off the floor. The only teams that have ever wanted to go small have like a Clint Capella at center, where he just doesn't do anything in terms of dribble, pass, shoot. The Orlando Magic here have a bunch of players who can dribble, pass, shoot, at good sizes, at 6'7", 6'8", especially if you add Ausar and Grady Dick. That's the entire point of making these selections, is that you're bigger, lengthier, and arguably more athletic than pretty much any other team you're going to face, which gives Jamal Mosley a lot of fun lineups that he could employ, but they still do have the guards to complement this as well, with a Cole Anthony, who I think had a huge season for himself. Markelle Fultz, of course, really started to look like himself and look like the former #1 overall pick that we saw from Washington from years ago. And I think that just overall, you know, if you're still banking on Jalen Suggs too, I still think there's a little bit in there that could come out and be beneficial to a team. So I wouldn't sell my stock completely on him either. Orlando would have a very intriguing 8 or 9 man rotation on day one of Grady Dick's career, honestly, just because I think day one he can be a significant help to a team that just did not shoot the ball very well last season. Pick 13 now, we go on to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And at this spot, I think the Thunder have a few different things that they would consider, but I do know that some Thunder fans would really love this selection, and I think that it's not off the table for Sam Presti to consider this guy, although for me, it's personally a little bit of a reach. I'm not as high on this guy as some others, but I do know some people believe that there is superstar potential in this player who would have been arguably the #1 prospect in the 2024 NBA draft, which goes to show how much weaker next year's draft is compared to this one, and that's GG Jackson, who I have going 13th. He had a really up and down year, mostly down more than up for South Carolina, but he is very young. Again, he reclassified to this year's draft, and because of that, you know, he opened himself up to have some early struggles, very similar struggles actually to Amani Bates and what we saw from him at Memphis. But I think that South Carolina had a little bit of a stronger commitment to GG Jackson. They didn't have a clear pathway of, oh, hey, we're going to be in the national tournament and we want to try and win, which is why Amani Bates, we saw some of his minutes really dwindle by the end of the year. South Carolina was just bad. So they kept riding GG Jackson because he was their best player. He was their most skilled player, and they just kept going with him. And there is some concerns for me about the consistency, his efficiency, his ability to make shots on the perimeter reliably, because a lot of those things, the NBA is turning into more of a math game night by night, day by day, just with the way that people are thinking and the kind of data that is being presented to these teams. And these teams pay a lot of money for that data, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars a year go into some of the data that they have. And a lot of it comes down to how many points do we score per possession, and when we defend, how many points do we allow per possession. I think Oklahoma City here, they're taking a risk on GG Jackson because he's not a PPP player when it comes to points per possession as of right now, but the hope would be that he becomes more efficient. He improves his skill set just by playing basketball every single day, and over the course of the next 2 years, you know, first couple of years, he probably doesn't give Oklahoma City a lot, even though they need a 4-man really, really badly, in my opinion, around Chet Holmgren, who that's going to be the big uptick here for OKC, is they have Chet Holmgren now. He's going to be the massive life changer for that organization. But GG Jackson could be a long-term, really intriguing play for Sam Presti and the Thunder. I think we'd probably have to see him spend some time with the Blue down in the G League, which is okay. In fact, I think that's a very good idea for a lot of young players who aren't getting significant play time right away in their careers to, I don't know, go play basketball. It sounds like a good idea for development to have them playing. And I think GG Jackson, somebody who the ceiling long-term is extremely high, but I also just think the floor is very, very low, which is why I would have some concerns about taking him. I think OKC, they might be better off taking like a surefire pick here and just adding to an already good young core. But the upside of taking a big swing and miss type prospect in GG Jackson, because if you hit, he could just make you a really, really, really long-term dangerous team. Pick 14, we look at the Toronto Raptors here now. And the Raptors, who I've loved to mock Cason Wallace to at 13 typically, he's not on the board at this spot, and we actually see them now with the last pick in the lottery because of the New Orleans Pelicans moving up in this mock. And at 14 for Toronto, I decided to go with something Masai Ujiri typically does not do, which is value shooting. Masai Ujiri loves to give his coaches a whole bunch of lengthy players so that they can be pretty good defensively and not be able to score the ball because they don't have a lot of skilled shot making from the perimeter. Well, now you give him one with Jordan Hawkins, who really built a lot of success and built his draft stock up significantly this March with the way that he played in the tournament. Before March, nobody had him as a lottery pick. I myself definitely did not. I still do not have a lottery grade on him. I think this would be a reach for Toronto, but I do think that realistically, this is the range that teams are going to look at him at. So it's not a reach in terms of that. regard with how teams are going to view these guys. But to me, it's a significant reach, just given the fact that I don't have him in the top 15 or 18 on my board right now. And I think there's better players out here that would be available for Toronto to potentially target. But I do think that there is at least a significant need here for a Hawkins-esque guy that if you're going to have a new coach, new coaching staff, you need to have some pieces that can give some creativity to this offense, whether you're using him as kind of a Spain screen setter or whether you're using him off of flares or dribble handoffs like we've seen from Sacramento and Miami specifically the most in the NBA. I think there's a lot of different ways to find success with Hawkins in your lineup and on your roster, just because shooting is king at the NBA level. The more shooting you have, the better, because you can space the court out and open it up for some of your good slashers. I think Pascal Siakam would welcome this pick. I think Scotty Barnes would probably be able to play good basketball now because he has some spacing around him with his play style, his ability to pass off the dribble, which I think is a big development point for him going forward as well. I think Hawkins here just opens the court, makes things make more sense for me offensively for the Raptors. Outside of the lottery now, we have the Atlanta Hawks at 15. And for this team, there are a few players I like. I ended up targeting Kris Murray for them as a player that I think that they would land on here. Just gives them some perimeter shot making. Again, we're talking about wings, we're talking about size, we're talking about perimeter shooting in this mock draft. It's been kind of the point of emphasis in this mock, and I think for Atlanta, it should be a point of emphasis for them because, you know, Onyeka Okongwu, I know that a lot of Atlanta fans really like him. He doesn't really step up behind the three-point line and knock it down regularly. Clint Capella definitely does not do that. John Collins could potentially be on the move, always seemingly on the trade block. Kris Murray's just kind of like the smart, oh, well, this guy's going to come in and have like a 12-year career for us, and he's going to just be a good basketball player. There's like really no risk to drafting Kris Murray here. The only risk is maybe there's a guy later that might end up becoming better long-term, but is less of a sure thing right now anyway than Kris Murray. Outside of the lottery, getting a guy who's going to be a pretty good high-impact player just makes sense, and it just feels really safe. There's really not a big argument as to why or why not here. It's just he fits the roster. He fits what they need to add long-term behind John Collins as a potential John Collins replacement long-term. I think everything just lines up here for Atlanta. I don't need to go off here about, oh, well, this is why, this, and another thing. Kris Murray's just a good basketball player. Let's not overthink it. Pick 16, we have the Utah Jazz here now, and I stick with what I had last mock as well with Keyonte George here for the Utah Jazz. Remember, we went with Cason Wallace earlier, so the Jazz grabbed two guards here, and it is tough for them to not grab a wing player in this draft because I do think that they need some wings long-term on this roster, but I think the Jazz have a multi-year view, a multi-year picture as to how to build this team, and I don't think it's centered around trying to reach for a player in year one. I just think that they're going to accrue good young talent, and I felt that way about Cason Wallace, who's a complete Danny Ainge pick. And I think Keyonte George is kind of a good high upside swing here because even though he shot under 40% from the field this past year and about 33-ish% from three for Baylor, there were games where this guy was unconscious and couldn't miss. And when he gets to those levels, there's really no type of defense, really no type of coverage that can slow him down because he's got the ability with his handle to get to certain spots on the floor that he's repped out thousands of times and can finish from those spots as a shot maker. But he's also just really quick twitch and can get to these spots really quickly. Even if you are playing good defense, he needs a sliver of space to get some of these looks off, and he's got the skill set to make some of these shots while semi-contested or semi-guarded. And because of that, I think Utah is an intriguing landing spot for him long-term because, yes, right now they have Clarkson and Sexton, and they've got kind of this backcourt that's already maybe a little full with Cason Wallace. But again, this is a long-term outlook for Utah. They're not picking off of one-year fits. If they were, they would have tried to make the playoffs a little bit harder this year. Okay, it wasn't their main intention. They sold off Malik Beasley. They sold off some of their other guys, Jared Vanderbilt, Mike Conley. They didn't have interest in making the playoffs. They wanted to line up lottery picks. They're going to continue to do that moving forward. So you take off of upside here. Keyonte George is the guy. Pick 17, we move on to the Los Angeles Lakers. And one of those teams that pretty interesting here in mock drafts because I think a lot of people would love to see this team add a high impact guy right now for year one. But I do think if you look at the Lakers long-term roster with where it currently sits, the need for some good long-term players too does make some sense. But given where they're currently at, I went with a guy who I feel like can fill both of those roles in different regards. Dariq Whitehead steps in day one, and he's going to be a nice role player on a winning team because he can space the floor and shoot the ball. That's really like the baseline. Hey, this guy can help us year one playing off of LeBron James, Anthony Davis by standing in the corner, standing by the break, standing above the break, and knocking down open shots. That's really the baseline. Hey, this guy's going to be able to play 15 minutes a game for us. The long-term outlook is this guy used to be the National Player of the Year in high school. This guy was playing through a foot injury that did not heal properly. He had foot surgery. It just did not work correctly, and his entire freshman season was kind of thrown in for a loop, and he still shot the ball very well, especially from behind the three-point line, playing through a foot injury, which is typically very damaging for a player's ability to perform on the court. Dariq Whitehead never really found a consistent role for Duke, but was still productive in the role that he had, which was a big adjustment for him, again, going from being the focal point on one of the best teams in the nation at the high school level to now being an off-the-bench player for one of the best teams at the collegiate level. Again, completely different game, completely different role. Still was productive. Never heard any, negativity from him throughout the season, which is already a good sign of his ability to fit into the Lakers' current system and the role he's going to have to fulfill playing next to LeBron and Anthony Davis. But it's also long-term a really, really nice sneaky upside pick because back in high school when he was healthy, if he comes back off that foot surgery and can play at the level we expect him to at some point, he could knock down shots off the move, off the bounce, and he becomes a kind of intriguing downhill player who his athleticism doesn't necessarily pop when you watch him, but I think it's like sneakily underrated and somebody who I think there's more in the tank for him to maybe grow into being like a secondary, tertiary scorer. Is he going to average 28 points a game in the NBA at some point? Likely not. I would heavily bet against that. But is there the upside there that somehow he scores like 18, 19, 20 points a game? Could he be a better Tim Hardaway Jr.? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. And that's why the Lakers here not only get a player who can help them in year one of his career, but also a player who could maybe grow into something better long-term, albeit a little unsure, a little unsteady. He's going to have another foot surgery, but still at this current spot, this current juncture, he helps the Lakers now, and he can definitely help them later if he continues to grow his game. Pick 18, we move on to the Miami Heat, and the Heat were a landing spot for Dariq Whitehead that I really did like, but with him off the board, there are a few other options I would consider, and I landed on Kobe Bufkin, and if you've been watching the mocks consistently here on the channel, you're going to notice a significant change of events here with where I had Kobe Bufkin in this mock. And the reason why, last mock draft, I asked you guys as viewers, what am I missing on Kobe Bufkin? I read through all of the replies, all the comments, which I always do, and I went and turned back on the tape. Everything I've watched on Kobe Bufkin, I went and rewatched again. I watched as much as I could on him after reading what you guys had to say and see if there was anything I missed. And for me, it doesn't necessarily move where I have him on my big board at all. I still like Kobe Bufkin as a player. I liked him as a player before. I like him as a player still now. But I do think that just with some of the things you guys were pointing out that I didn't necessarily see as much of, I think some more teams will have interest in him at maybe a higher level than what I'm projecting. Remember, I don't really look at other people's mock drafts. I don't really take in consensus views at all. This is what I believe. This is what I think will happen. It is solely my mock draft with some of the intel that I have from some sources. So with Miami here at 18, I went with Kobe Bufkin because, one, there's a need at the guard spot. Kyle Lowry just not been the Kyle Lowry that they were hoping he would be when they signed him. Gabe Vincent, Max Strus are both also lined up for free agency, so that already makes some sense in terms of positional value. But Kobe Bufkin's just a good perimeter shot maker. He's a very good connector. He's smart, crafty. I think he's an underrated athlete, nearly averaging a block per game, despite being a little bit smaller. I've heard some comparisons to Jalen Brunson. I don't see that as much. I kind of understand like the idea of like he's going to make the right decision. I do think when you watch this player, you can see him actually processing the court. Kind of like when you watch a quarterback, you're trying to see if he's going through multiple reads and progressions. I think Kobe Bufkin does that as a guard, which is already a very intriguing player for me and a guy that you could sell yourself on because of that, which is why I think Miami here gets probably their long-term starting point guard at pick 18 of this year's draft. Pick 19, the Golden State Warriors here now at this spot, a team that We'll see how their postseason success either ends or continues on in this playoffs. But with where they're currently at, I feel like the Warriors have a lot of chances to improve to their team, especially with the way that they like to play. And Trayce Jackson-Davis, for me, is really the guy that makes a ton of sense here. Even with how great Kevon Looney's been in the postseason for Golden State, and I would say he's been very, very great. When you watch them, you can still see there's some limitations with the way that they would like to play based on what Kevon Looney can do for them offensively. And I'm not talking about perimeter shot making. I'm not talking about stepping behind the three-point line and being a three-point threat. I'm talking about facilitating out of short rolls. I'm talking about passing out of the post. I'm talking about being a connector offensively. And those are all things Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to do better in the NBA than Kevon Looney. Now, is he going to be the rebounder Kevon Looney's been? Definitely not. I think people forget that Kevon Looney was such a dominant rebounder back at Oregon in his time in college that it's not surprising that he's had such good games for Golden State rebounding the basketball this postseason, and just in the last 5-10 years or so, he's been fantastic for Golden State since they drafted him. But I think now Trayce Jackson-Davis gives you a different style big who can still do some of the same things. I think he's a better shot blocker than Looney. I don't think he challenges on post-ups as well, though. So kind of a different style. You can roll with Trayce Jackson-Davis, who I think is going to be a very smart big, very intuitive big, who doesn't need a lot of time getting coached up to be impactful at the NBA level, because he had Mike Woodson as a coach. He's had NBA level coaching in his career so far in college, that I think he's going to step into the NBA day one. He's a perfect fit into what Golden State wants to do, the way that they want to play. He's going to be a fantastic dribble handoff guy as well, in my opinion, which is why the Warriors here get an absolute home run pick. I talked about earlier how Anthony Black was maybe the best fit in the draft up to that point. This is the best fit in the draft. Trayce Jackson-Davis to Golden State. I hope to God it happens, because a lot of people are lower on Trayce Jackson-Davis than myself. I just hope the Warriors just look at themselves internally and say, this is what we need. This is the player that fits our best players. We need to take him right now at 19. I just think it's an absolute home run, A+ selection for them on draft night if they get him. 20, we have the Houston Rockets here. Remember earlier on one was Scoot Henderson. So how do we complement Scoot Henderson alongside Jalen Green and some of these other good young players that the Rockets have? And it's going with another connecting type player in Jett Howard, who has found success playing in a variety of styles. He's a very good catch and shoot guy, found a lot of success at the collegiate level. Now his shooting off the dribble, a little bit less consistent, as you would expect. That's typical for most players. And because of that, that's why fitting in Houston against or alongside Jalen Green and Scoot Henderson makes sense, because I'm telling you right now, the Rockets aren't going to have Scoot Henderson and Jalen Green just sitting on the side while we get some Jett Howard isolations. That's just not how it's going to work. Ime Udoka is way too smart of a coach for that. But what I do think is Jett Howard has the skill set for a tertiary playmaker, where he's going to be the third option to handle the ball for this Rockets team, and he's going to run 4 to 6 pick and rolls a game. Not a massive amount, but if you score 1.3 points per possession on those 4 to 6 plays, maybe we see an uptick in those down the road, and he's a player who can grow into some really meaningful minutes for this Rockets team. I think he's a significant upgrade over Jae'Sean Tate. I think that instantly the Rockets have not only improved their point guard position in this draft with Scoot, but then they've also improved their small forward position with Jett Howard. You see Jabari Smith play the 4, Alperen Şengün the 5. The Rockets would still have about $60 million in cap space to add to this team. Probably would see Jett Howard move to the bench, with them likely trying to make a move for a bigger name, bigger time small forward, maybe like a Chris Middleton, to help kind of accelerate the rebuild here, especially since they owe their 2024 first to the Oklahoma City Thunder anyway. So it's just about, hey, let's take some meaningful steps forward. Let's play some more competitive games. And I think Jett Howard, probably off the bench year one, could be a really, really good addition for this team as well. Pick 21, we have the Brooklyn Nets here now, who actually have back-to-back picks in this draft this year. They have 21 and 22. Both of them I could see being attached in a trade for, say, a Damian Lillard. Not that that would be the entire package, but they would be used in that package. So we'll see. Maybe the Nets aren't picking here on draft night. We'll see what actually happens and what goes down when it comes to trades. But if they are, the first guy I like for them is Dereck Lively, the second out of Duke. A lot of the time I've had Dereck Lively off the board at this spot. I do want to highlight that this would be a potential scenario in which Lively maybe slides down a little bit further than I was initially projecting. For me, I have him kind of as a fringe lottery level player in this year's draft, but it comes down to what teams value and what teams prioritize. And if they just have a significantly higher grade on somebody, Lively potentially falls past them, even though I initially viewed that as a landing spot. which is why Brooklyn here does make some sense as well as a team that could really be benefited by adding a Dereck Lively, because he's super lengthy, athletic, can really protect the rim. And I think one big thing is he rebounds the basketball. Brooklyn and Jacques Vaughn multiple times this year, they knew they couldn't rebound the basketball, which is very interesting because they, ultimately decided Ben Simmons has no role for us and he missed some time with injuries, this and the other thing. Ben Simmons can rebound the ball. That's one thing he can do very, very well. So they have some options if they were to go that way. Obviously, there's other complications with that as well. But Dereck Lively is kind of the young big that makes sense as a backup to Nic Claxton. I think would let you play a very similar style to what Nic Claxton does, which is good for continuity from starting center to backup center early in their careers. I just like Dereck Lively a lot. I think Lively is going to be a nice player in this league. I think he's going to have a high impact for teams down the road. And because of that, I think that the Nets are getting a big time steal here. And to be honest, if I was Houston at 20, I probably would have taken Lively myself. But I went with Jett Howard here because I think it's possible the Rockets could look to use some money on a center in free agency that kind of gives them some of the things they're looking for as a rim protector behind Şengün. 22, sticking on the Brooklyn Nets at this spot, we're going with Brice Sensabaugh, another player I like in this draft. I talked about how Cam Whitmore has a really nice triple threat game, and a lot of Cam Whitmore's success is predicated off of athletic burst out of the triple threat. Brice Sensabaugh is less so like that. He's a little bit more just skill based. He can get to a spot. He doesn't necessarily have to blow by a guy to find success. In fact, most of the time he finds success, he doesn't actually blow by the guy. He just gets to a spot where he's comfortable and says, yeah, I know I can make this shot. And he just rises up and shoots and scores. Very reminiscent to me of DeMar DeRozan. Now, I think there's a big distinguishing factor between these two guys. DeMar DeRozan was such a good athlete, especially when he was young, first coming into the league. We forget about this guy just, being a slam dunk contest participant, those kinds of things. Brice Sensabaugh will never be that. He's not that athletic, but he does have some athletic traits that make you think this guy can be a 10-year NBA player. Like, he doesn't need to absolutely throw down windmill dunks and 360s in transition for him to stick in the league. Okay, he's not going to get invited to All-Star Weekend to dunk the basketball, but he probably will get invited to All-Star Weekend as a rising star because he's going to have a very good rookie season. I think he's going to be highly productive. You look at Malachi Branham, funny enough, an Ohio State product as well. I think Brice Sensabaugh is probably a little bit of a better Malachi Branham in terms of his ability to actually make shots. I know Branham shot the lights out from behind the three-point line. I think that's still a question here for Sensabaugh. But I think Sensabaugh can be more of a dynamic on-ball scorer in the NBA, which is what I think Brooklyn's still going to be looking to add to their roster going past this season. Portland here now, pick 23. This pick comes from the New York Knicks in that Josh Hart trade. Earlier on, we had the Blazers go with Taylor Hendricks, and now with this pick, 23rd overall, I think there's a few things we could really highlight for Portland. First one being Jalen Hood-Schifino, the guy that I really like here for them because, again, I talked about the potentially choosing of a direction. And if you are moving Damian Lillard, you're probably going to look at kind of Anthony Simons as your point guard. And there is some limitations with Simons. Now, I know a lot of Blazers fans love him, and I think he's a very talented young player. But size-wise, I just don't want to see the Blazers continually make the same mistakes, which is trying to play two tiny guards together with no rim protection behind them and expecting to be really good. So we are changing that narrative in this mock draft. We went with Taylor Hendricks to provide some rim protection, and also his ability to shoot the three ball fits as well. And then we also look here at Jalen Hood-Schifino, a bigger guard, about 6'5"-ish, ability to get into the mid-range and knock down shots. His ceiling, I don't think is extremely high, but he's kind of more of a prototypical point guard for what you're wanting from a guy in the NBA right now. He's just going to make sound decisions. He's not going to turn the ball over a crazy amount. Sometimes he does miss some reads, but that's pretty typical for a young collegiate player. Remember, this guy is a freshman, so you have to expect him to screw some stuff up and not make the right read all the time, but oftentimes he does. He sees the floor very well. He's a peripheral passer. What I mean by that is he sees corner to corner. He can attack downhill and understand, okay, if I'm on the right side of the floor, my short corner's here. If they don't help here, they're probably helping from the opposite corner, which means I can flick the ball over my head or in front of my face and get the ball over there timely and create open shots. That's something we've seen him do routinely. Now, I think for him, it's still about finding the balance between shot maker and creator for others. And sometimes he makes up his mind a little too early, but again, that's a very typical trait for young guys. I think he'll learn that as he gets into the league, especially with some good coaching, which I'm hoping. I mean, like the whole point of this draft is to give Chauncey Billups the things that he needs to actually coach the way he wants to coach. He does not want to play a small team, a non-athletic team with no rim protection. He wants guys who can defend. You think back to when he won an NBA championship, it was all about defense, defense, defense. You don't want to have this whole like offensive juggernaut type team that can't defend anybody, which is, I wouldn't even say Portland's been an offensive juggernaut, but they have more offensive weapons than defensive guys. And I think this draft is kind of correcting that a little bit by giving some size, giving some rim protection, and just positional flexibility a little bit more so for Chauncey Billups moving forward. Pick 24 now, we move into the Sacramento Kings, who at this spot, I a lot of the time liked Ryan Rupert for them, but I actually opted to go a different way here, and I went with Noah Clowney for a variety of reasons. First of all, I think, Game 7 is going to stick out to Kings fans for quite a while against the Warriors, where they just could not rebound the ball. They could not keep Kevon Looney off the glass. So let's get another rebounder in there, another guy who can put a body on somebody and clear the boards, because that's really one of the most important things in the NBA is rebounding the basketball. It doesn't get talked about enough, but it is extremely important. And you just really can't win if you're getting destroyed and dominated on the glass like the Kings were in Game 7. Now, it's not a huge complaint for them throughout the year. Domantas Sabonis is a fantastic rebounder, but just having another body definitely helps. Secondly, on offense, you think about the way that Trey Lyles fit. Let's get a younger Trey Lyles, somebody who can probably grow into that as an offensive three-point shooter who can play as a big. And it provides more spacing, more options for Mike Brown. It provides more spacing for De'Aaron Fox to continue to attack the rim. And I do think that for Sacramento, with how great Sabonis and Fox played this year, you feel really good about that. I do think that there should be a little bit of long-term hesitancy about Domantas Sabonis in the postseason and what that's going to continually look like if he does not enhance his game over this offseason, because he's very left-handed. He's very reliant on finishing at or around the rim. Of course, he does have that little mid-range jump shot, but he doesn't shoot from behind the arc. Let's get a different style big in there. Not that Sabonis is the problem, but it gives you another option to change the style that you're playing in case the defense is using things against you that Sabonis just can't really take advantage of. I think Noah Clowney maybe could take advantage of them in more of an off-ball, less of a facilitative role, which I know does destroy some of what Sacramento likes to do, but sometimes you need to have optionality, and I think that's what the Kings would prefer to do with this rendition of my mock draft. 25, the Memphis Grizzlies here now at this spot, and for Memphis, a few different things I consider. Dillon Brooks obviously likely not going to be there, but I actually went with a point guard in Amari Bailey, and I know some people are going to be really puzzled by this because you think, oh, well, they have John, they have Tyus Jones. Why the heck would they do something like this? It's because I think the Grizzlies are lining up for a big-time move. I'm talking an OG Anunoby type trade where they're going to give up 3 or 4 first-round picks, maybe even that 2024 Golden State Warriors first, to Toronto for an OG Anunoby level player. Now, maybe it's for a different player that I haven't highlighted up to this point, because I do think that there's possibility that Toronto wants to keep Anunoby, and then therefore Memphis has to turn a different direction to find a different starting level wing. But my assumption is Tyus Jones probably is attached in the deal to get the money to work. So because of that, Tyus Jones goes bye-bye. They try and find a new point guard to be their backup point guard, and that's Amari Bailey here. For me, I would have loved for them to have kept Kennedy Chandler. Now, I think Kenneth Lofton can have an okay role in this league. I know people are going to be really buzzing about his game that he scored a crazy amount of points while they lost. Whatever, I don't really care about that game. Doesn't matter to me. I think Kennedy Chandler could have been a nice backup point guard in this league. They decided to waive him, which was a surprising decision in my eyes. But I do think here Memphis goes out, spends a first-round pick on a guard, Amari Bailey, with the intention of potentially trading Tyus Jones with some assets to perhaps land an OG Anunoby. Now, possibly this pick gets traded as well in that deal. So maybe this isn't the pick to kind of solve that point guard spot. Maybe they would use their mid-level exception on that. But either way, Memphis has to address their small forward position, and it might come at the cost of Tyus Jones as a point guard, which is why I went with Amari Bailey here in this mock draft. Pick 26, the Indiana Pacers here now. This pick comes from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Remember, 4th overall, we went with Amen Thompson with the idea that maybe they could trade out of it. Otherwise, they could potentially keep it. And I think in addition to that, we're looking for just more wings. And this one's really, really raw as well in Rayan Rupert. But I do think that there's a lot of upside for this kid, especially defensively. I think he could grow into being one of the better point of attack defenders from this year's draft. And getting him at 26 is really, really good value. Remember, last year in the second round, the Pacers went with Kendall Brown from Baylor. And I think that Rayan Rupert has significantly higher upside on both ends of the floor than Brown, because defensively, he's lengthier. I think he's got better instincts and timing when it comes to actually poking the ball loose and being disruptive. I think he's going to play very similar to Gary Trent Jr., actually, with his ability to poke the ball loose on ball handlers. I think he's got really just fantastic awareness of where the ball is likely going to be when he reaches. You turn on the tape on him and you're going to see poke steal after poke steal, especially if you're watching highlights, which is something I do every once in a while just to keep myself a little more positive on these players. I do watch just a lot of normal game film and that kind of stuff, but watching highlights kind of generates some of that buzz, especially when you're about to record an hour-long video. You want to be excited about these guys. So Rayan Rupert is somebody I'm excited about. I think he's going to be fun to watch in the league. He's more of an advantage attacker right now, 4-on-3, 3-on-2, transition opportunities is where he's going to find success offensively. If you ask him to break somebody down, yeah, good luck with that. He's going to maybe at best in 5-on-5 settings attack a closeout. But really, teams are probably going to be slow to close out on him anyway. So I think the big question is how many shots can he make from the perimeter early in his career, because that's going to dictate his play time or not. But I do think that Indiana here is getting some lengthy and athletic wing type players, which is what they really need to add to their roster. Pick 27. At this spot, we have the Charlotte Hornets via the Denver Nuggets. And for this team, I went with Leonard Miller from the G League Ignite program. And the reason I went with him is I think, with them already having grabbed Cam Whitmore in this draft and the idea of Miles Bridges coming back, let's get them kind of this like toolsy player who I could see Mitch Kupchak definitely signing up for, because this is the type of player he would like to draft. Athletic, lengthy at 6'10", can handle the ball a little bit, can pass just a hair. Now, I wouldn't trust it at all because he's likely going to throw the ball out of bounds as many times as he makes a really nice backdoor pass. But he's going to be fun to watch. His highlights are going to look fantastic from his rookie season, because there's going to be plays where he's like, wow, behind the back pass, really in transition from a 6'10" forward. That's crazy. But then there's also, for every highlight, there's going to be a low light with it too, which people will see less and less of. I really think Leonard Miller, his first year, is going to be very intriguing to watch in the league, because he can rebound the basketball. He's got a lot of the tools you're looking for. It's just about harnessing them and getting them to where they need to be. Do I trust Steve Clifford to be the guy to do that? My definitive answer on that is no. But at the same time, the Hornets are an intriguing fit because they already have a good amount of length, size with the wings that we were able to draft in this class, and then also LaMelo Ball at 6'7" at point guard, Mark Williams behind, who's extremely lengthy and a fantastic standing reach. I think Leonard Miller slots in as kind of your true 4 in this, like long term. Now, I don't think year one he starts at all, but we're going to see him more with the Greensboro Swarm than we would the Charlotte Hornets anyway. But I do think that long term, there's hope that this guy could develop and grow into a nice player, a nice kind of multifaceted player who can impact the game in a variety of ways, which is why I think Charlotte here would strongly consider him at 27. 28 now, we have the Utah Jazz here. This pick comes from the Philadelphia 76ers through the Brooklyn Nets in the Royce O'Neal deal. And at this spot, Utah, after having already addressed guard twice, they go with more of this like wing shooter type in Brandon Pajemski from Santa Clara, a guy who I really like in this year's draft. I think he's going to have a really nice, solid career for himself because of his ability to shoot the basketball. Gravity and floor spacing is really a premium in this league, and the fact that they're getting somebody who shot above 42% from 3 at the collegiate level in a high volume role, high volume amount of attempts, probably means there's a lot of good success coming for Brandon Pajemski at the NBA level, because one, he's not going to be very focused in on. If you're playing for Utah, the focal points are going to be denying Walker Kessler lob opportunities, of course, trying to push Lauri Markkanen off of his spots. And then when it comes to those guards, we've already added a couple that teams are going to have a lot more worry about when it comes to the scouting report, which means, oh, hey, Brandon Pajemski is just in the game and a guy might rotate off of him too early and ball swings to him and he's going to knock down an open shot. He's probably going to be able to average 6 to 10 points a game right away his rookie season, which might not sound like a lot, but comparatively to this last class, that puts you in pretty good conversation with some guys who are maybe even lottery picks. So I think that Podziemski, I think there's a really high end upside here for him, just because we've seen shooters just last in the league and be extremely valued by all 30 NBA teams, especially when you're trying to pair guys up with superstars and just add more spacing and more pieces on the court. It just makes a lot of sense. I think Podziemski could be a really nice long-term piece for Utah. When it comes to team building, you need to check off those skills that we talked about earlier. And I think three-point shooting and just distance shot making is really important. And that's why, for me, he stays in the first round pretty much every single mock draft. Pick 29, now we see the Indiana Pacers here. This pick comes from the Boston Celtics in the Malcolm Brogdon trade. And with this selection, I have them going with Sidy Cissoko from the G League Ignite program. So we actually have 2 G League Ignite players going in the last 3 selections here. And Sidy Cissoko, I know is a player that a lot of people like. He's gotten more second round buzz from me instead of first round buzz. But here's a spot where I do think it makes some sense for Indiana to consider. This guy is extremely athletic. He's a really good 2-foot jumper. He loves going to his spin move, which is kind of a carry, kind of not. We're not going to really harp on it too much, but kind of. But I do think he's got like the kind of intriguing downhill traits that would fit really well around a Tyrese Halliburton. Again, one of the big questions is shot making. For me, with Indiana, I think that adding another shooter like a Brandon Podziemski would have made a lot of sense. But I don't know if they feel that they need to do that because they still have Buddy Hield on the roster. I think that long-term you should be lining up your shooting around Tyrese Halliburton and just have good long-term planning around that, because I think it's going to be one of the most important skills for Indiana to continue to have around a player like Tyrese. But nonetheless, you need good athletes. You need more athleticism on this team in general, which is why we've targeted that a lot in this draft with Amen Thompson, now adding Sidy Cissoko as well. We're going with wings who can move and get downhill. Sissoko is very one-handed, and he's right-handed, so he's very reliant on his dominant hand. He definitely needs to play for the Fort Wayne Mad Ants next year a lot. I just don't see him playing 20 minutes a game in the NBA right away, which is okay. This is pick 29 of the NBA draft. This doesn't need to be a day one home run guy who plays 30 minutes a game for you. Take the long-term approach. He's had a very nice season for the G League Ignite program. Definitely garners some first round respect and at least a discussion of him in the first round, which is why I think Indiana here at 29 would consider him. Then at pick 30, we move on here to the Los Angeles Clippers, and the Clippers have a real track record for swinging on upside, specifically from the high school ranks to players who didn't necessarily perform as well as they would have hoped to in college. And I wouldn't be shocked if they gave a guarantee to a guy like Dillon Mitchell, who was a former top 10, top 15-ish recruit. I think a lot of people had hopes and expectations for him at Texas that he would grow into this kind of star player with all the physical traits in the world to back it up. And he just didn't do that. Skill-wise, I think he's probably the least skilled player in the class that has gone up to this point in the first round. And you might be saying, then why do you really like this kid? And it's because in the NBA, it's not about one-on-one skill and shot making across the board. It is for the stars and it is for some of your offensive go-to guys, but your third, fourth, fifth player on the court don't necessarily always have to do that. Think about PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker has been a big plus player this year for the 76ers, even in games where he shoots 0 times. And there's like a week-long stretch at times where he doesn't even shoot the ball. I don't even know if he knows what the color of the rim is at this point. And that's okay. He doesn't have to, because he still impacts the game in a variety of ways. Dillon Mitchell, he'll get up some field goal attempts, but they're not really going to be what we classify as shots. They're going to be a lot of dunks and layups there, which is good because the Clippers, I think, just need more rim pressure in general. It's been one of my big complaints about them as a team, which is why I thought Russell Westbrook made sense there. It's why I thought acquiring Mason Plumlee made sense. Is why even acquiring Eric Gordon made some sense, even though that one made less sense. It still made some sense to me. And he's a deep range shot maker as well, Gordon is. So they added pieces. And now I just think, again, you look at their draft history too, they've taken a BJ Boston. They've taken swings on guys that have been higher ranked prospects before coming into the NBA draft. And I just think that there's a lot of guys out there that the Clippers do their homework on, and they're not afraid of taking these more project toolsy players. You think about when they drafted Jay Scrubb. They've made a lot of selections that kind of fit the bill here for what Dillon Mitchell could potentially become in the NBA, which in my opinion is a better Jared Vanderbilt if everything goes right. Now, that's a long pathway for him. He's not going to be better than Jared Vanderbilt for at least the first 3 or 4 years of his career. But I mean, if you even get something similar to a Jared Vanderbilt at pick 30. It just feels like a massive home run because Vanderbilt has been huge for every team he's played on. He was really good for the Wolves last year, really good for the Jazz in his short tenure there. And of course, since the Lakers have acquired him, their teams just look completely differently. He's been one of their main defensive guys to go to, but also has given them some decent offensive minutes. I know that's one of the big concerns about him long-term is what do you do with him offensively? He's smart and creative enough to figure out how to play around the dunker spot, which is exactly what Dillon Mitchell's going to do at the NBA level, which is why I really like him still as a first-round level player in this year's draft. Thank you all so much for watching. I had a lot of fun recording this NBA mock draft. Again, we covered the entire first round in a pretty lengthy video, so if you do enjoy all of the hard work that goes into this, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, turn that notification bell, and don't forget to comment down below where you want Victor Wembanyama to go on draft lottery night. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.